we'll go ahead and get started, but it's good to see people continuing to trickle in. And thank you all for coming. A very warm welcome back to the Dallas-Fort Worth Society of the Archaeological Institute of America's 2019-2020 lecture series. For those of you who might be new to the AIA, I normally give a quick introduction. I'd also like to encourage everyone to check out our website, dfwarchaeological.org, and we're on all the great social media channels, Twitter, Instagram, at DFW Archaeological, and we warmly invite you to follow us there. I just wanted to show you quickly that on our website now, you can check for the lecture list, and we'll keep all of this up to date. And we have a new lecture with the Dallas Museum of Art. For those of you who are students or AIA members, we've just added this Pixels in Prehistory lecture, and we'll be sending an email around to register for that. If you are members of the AIA, amongst the other benefits we'll talk about in a minute, you will get to go to that lecture for free instead of paying $5. For students it's free, but for non-student members. Also, tonight we normally have dinner at Desperados, but they've told us that they don't have space for us. So we're going to Penne Pomodoro in Snyder Plaza, so please do join us for dinner after the lecture. There's a quick map of how to get there. Just go around on Daniel and come up Hillcrest. It's also about a 10-minute walk for those of you who are without cars. And we'll then go back to the PowerPoint. Right, so the AIA is America's oldest and largest professional organization for archaeology. We were founded in 1879 and also chartered by an act of Congress a few years after. And the AIA is very interested in promoting knowledge of the human pass-through material remains in the public interest. And so among the AIA's members, of course, we have a minority of us who are actually professional archaeologists, but also a large number of students and lay people. And so we want to encourage everyone to consider getting involved in the AIA. The DFW AIA is led by myself, Martin Gallagher, and our Vice President Marcia McCoy, who I think is here, and our Secretary and Treasurer Angela, and Javier, our fantastic emerita in whose large shoes I stand, Melissa Dowling, and Carl Petruso, another, both past presidents of the Society, and also Christopher Furman at UNT, and Sally Hansen, who leads our sister organization, the North Texas chapter of the American Research Center in Egypt. So we'd like to invite everyone to join the AIA at the national website, archaeological.org. If you live on the fringes of the Dallas area, please note in your membership that you do want to be affiliated with the DFW chapter, and that comes with a range of benefits, especially for students. These are achievable scholarships to defray the cost of participating in archaeological fieldwork. You get a discounted membership, which basically is the cost of subscribing to Archaeology magazine. So we'll say more about that in a minute. I didn't quite want to do that. Also, from a philanthropic standpoint, the AIA provides fellowships and grants that enable some of the technical and expensive aspects of archaeological fieldwork and conservation to take place and to conserve our invaluable archaeological sites. And that's what I wanted to say. you have access, discounted access to the premier journal in the archaeology of the Mediterranean, and also Archaeology Magazine, which is written by working field archaeologists, but for a lay readership. And so that comes to you free with an AIA membership, and you get a heavily discounted subscription as well to AJA. And also travel. The AIA maintains a database of fieldwork opportunities on their website. And for those of you interested in going on a tour, members get a 10% discount on their first tour. So that's an opportunity to see the Mediterranean without getting dirty, in a more casual and luxurious way. One fieldwork, sorry, these slides are out of order. As you know, I've been working on the San Giuliano Archaeological Research Project. The project is almost full this year, but there still are a few spaces for students who are able to get credit through Baylor, George Mason, or Anderson universities. We have been working at the site with over 1,000 rock-cut tombs and excavating some unlooted Etruscan tombs, which have made the Italian news, and also a medieval castle complex with very interesting evidence of feasting and so on. And my own work is on the roads and landscape, these fabulous Etruscan rock-cut roads and so on. So it's a great hands-on experience, 6 weeks. We include you in all aspects of archaeological work, including the final record keeping that allows things to move to publication, and take you around to some of the neighboring sites. Beautiful places in Italy, some of which are off the beaten track a little bit, including Orvieto, my favorite town in Italy, Assisi, Cerveteri and its beautiful beach, and Roman theater at Sutri, and the papal town of Viterbo. So do contact me if you're interested in that. And starting next year, we're going to begin some excavations in the neighboring town of Blera, and so which has standing Roman architecture. So if you're interested in that, get in touch with me. And then our next lecture will be in just 3 weeks' time. Stephanie Langen-Hooper from SMU will be talking about the inside story of repatriating 12 Roman mosaics fragments. And as I say, please join us for further conversation, dinner and drinks at Penny Pomodoro in Snyder Plaza. And with that, it's my pleasure to, first of all, figure this out technologically. But yeah, that's it. There you go. Smarter than I looked. But it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Timmy Gambin of the Department of Classics and Archaeology at the University of Malta. Professor Gambin has extensive fieldwork experience working on one of the great growing areas of archaeology today, underwater archaeology. He's coming straight from a couple of weeks at Texas A&M, so we're lucky that he found time to come talk to us about this interesting Phoenician shipwreck off the coast of Gozo in Malta. Professor Gambin has worked in underwater archaeology across the Mediterranean, from Spain and as far as the Philippines, I just learned. And I know we're all looking forward to hearing about this Phoenician shipwreck in Zelendi Bay. So let's please give a warm welcome to Professor Gambin.
I'm going to try and not use a mic, so if you need me to up the volume at the back, just make me a sign. Thank you, Martin, for the introduction and for your chapter to invite me to give this talk. This talk is divided into three. We're first going to look at how we discovered the site and the techniques and technologies that we've used to study it. Then we're going to look at a few of the results that have been coming out of this project. And then finally, I dedicate the last part of my talk to how one communicates such a site, okay? A site that is hidden so far underwater. Generally, I always say that this talk lasts for 50 minutes, but inadvertently, I always overrun, so please try and stay awake, and there'll be ample time for questions and answers after. Okay, so for those of you who don't know where Malta is, we're a little rock that measures 17 miles by 8, bang in the center of the Mediterranean. Our closest neighbor is the massive island, the largest island in the Mediterranean, that is Sicily, and it's our sister island, cultured not only geographically, but also culturally. The first humans to inhabit the Maltese islands came from Sicily in approximately 5,500 BC. There are 3 islands in the archipelago. If you can call Gambin an island, it has a grand total of 3 residents. I kid you not. And our project is off the northern island of Gozo. It's about half the size of Malta, but 10% of the population. Malta is one of the most densely populated places in the entire world. Specifically, our shipwreck is located off this western tip, which is important for a couple of reasons. And in order to understand why the location of the shipwreck is important, we need to be at least 5 nautical miles out at sea and look at the island, observe the island as a mariner would observe it. And there are 2 things which I would like to point out. Firstly, that is the headland under which the shipwreck is situated. There is a Carthaginian, a Punic temple, a Punic place of worship that dates back to about 400 BC. In order to understand the function of this sanctuary, you have to look seaward. It's about 7 kilometers from the ancient center of habitation, so there would be no other reason to build a sanctuary there other than its position, okay, in the maritime landscape. The second arrow is pointing to this white feature in the cliffs, and this denotes the entrance to Shlendi Bay. And Shlendi Bay, its importance in the context of ancient seafaring in this area is that it's the first harbor with fresh water that you come across if you're sailing towards the central Mediterranean from the island of Pantelleria or from Cape Bon in Tunisia. This is a picture of our commute to the office, okay, so we're leaving the harbor here behind us, and the shipwreck is situated somewhere there. So this is important because not only is the place extremely beautiful from a perspective of nature, but it is quite radical actually as a landscape. The seabed shoots up from approximately 120 meters to 30. You have this curved headland, okay? And the headland is facing the prevailing wind, which is the northwesterly, the maestrale. So all these things combine, and do not be deceived, it can change from that to this in no time. It doesn't look like much of a sea, but we are 130 meters above sea level, okay? So there are all these aspects that combine to make this a very treacherous area. In fact, besides our shipwreck, which is in this area here, underneath the entrance, there are remnants of another 2 shipwrecks and objects, so loose objects, which span from 2500 BC all the way up to 800 AD. So this is reflective of two things. One, the nearly continuous maritime use of this space, and two, how treacherous the sea actually is. In fact, exploration of the inner site starts in about 1958. There are a number of projects by the British forces. They are the first people to have scuba gear on the islands. Malta was a British colony for 150 years. And they between 58 and 63, they run a number of projects, training projects, and they start bringing up amphoras and other pieces of ceramics from the seabed. Fast forward a number of years, and we wanted, so the British were bringing up objects from this area here, and as I said, it dips from about 60 meters, which is the deepest they worked in, down to 105 meters, so about 330 feet, more or less, okay, so in no time. So we wanted to establish whether the British had exhausted this archaeological deposit or whether it extended into deeper waters. So we were running a sonar survey to establish the presence or not of this site. And when you're working out at sea, one of the key lessons that I've picked up in the decades that I've been doing this is when your equipment is working and the weather is fine, just continue working, you know. So we decided to extend the survey to cover the entire outer Schlendi Bay. One thing I forgot to mention is where the buildings are, where the sea finishes, and you see that concentration of building. In ancient times, that was a port, and it has since silted over. So we achieved what we set out to do, was that we discovered a Punic shipwreck in this area, so a massive archaeological deposit here, but this is what caught our eye. We weren't expecting this. You can see a landscape or a seascape or the seabed, which is absolutely devoid of any features except for this thing over here. Now, this is way back in 2007, so this season will be the 13th year that we're working on this site. It's a long-term, very long-term project. And that's all we had in year one. We were kind of excited, but I've been excited before, especially 2 occasions in Croatia. I was about to bet my mortgage on the fact that we had found 2 ancient shipwrecks, and they turned out to be amphora-shaped rocks. So that wouldn't have gone down very well with my wife. Okay, so we went back in the next year, in 2008, with a more powerful sonar, which delivers a higher resolution image. And now you can start to see patterns. So, mouths of amphorae, you can see 3 in a row. You can see blocks worked on either extremity, round shadows. Nature doesn't produce such, well, famous. I'm very well known for my sweeping statements and famous last words, but I was pretty convinced when I saw this that we were dealing with an ancient shipwreck. The only problem, Martin, if I tear the screen, you're responsible. The only problem is here. You see, this area is packed with objects, as is here, and you have an area that's devoid of any objects here. Now, I want you to keep these objects in mind, and I'll explain in a couple of minutes' time why there's that void. So in 2009, we deployed a small ROV, a small remote operated vehicle with a 5-megapixel camera, and that is the very first picture that was ever taken of the site. Oh, let's see. Look at that. Thank you. So, straight away, as Martin explained, I've been on a number of projects throughout the Mediterranean, been involved in the study of quite a few shipwrecks. This is the earliest one I've worked on, but which date from about the 4th century BC, besides this, all the way up to the 7th, 8th AD. And I had never seen anything like this. If you look up a photograph or a sonar image of a typical Roman shipwreck, it's generally, unless sort of it's broken up and dispersed, it's generally a large mound of amphorae and one, maximum two types. Okay, so the trade in Roman times had changed into the sort of mass transportation of wine, garum, and olive oil. At a glance, you can see that there are a number of different shapes. You don't need to be an expert in sort of the archaic Mediterranean to realize that there are a number of different shapes. Actually, Martin, I didn't tell you this, but in the first weeks after we got these photographs, I actually thought we had an Etruscan trader. Right, with that same ROV, we managed to produce a photo mosaic. This image consists of 270 photographs that are stitched together. Today it looks pretty archaic. Again, I'll show you some of the latest stuff that we've done, but this was a crucial piece of information. When you're working at depth underwater, you're dependent on the light of your instrument. So you're really looking at a limited area. It's a bit like going to a museum of art and looking at a fantastic painting by Caravaggio up close. You can admire the artist's technique, you can sort of admire the texture of the painting, but in order to really understand the painting in all its glory, you need to step back. And this is what a photo mosaic helps us to do when dealing with an underwater, especially when dealing with an underwater site. It also helped us define the layout of the cargo. So there is a very, very specific layout with work blocks on either extremities and the ceramics that are concentrated in the middle. Okay, and this section here was probably once filled with these outliers. My theory is that the site must have been discovered by a fisherman who was putting down his nets and getting them stuck, getting them and bringing up pieces of amphorae, and the core business of a fisherman is to catch fish. And he would have abandoned the site soon after he discovered it. Okay, before I continue, the next thing we wanted to know was whether we were looking at the bottom layer of a cargo, and this hypothesis was strengthened by the presence of these blocks. You know, that you'd put blocks as a paying ballast to weight down the ship, but then what happened to the topmost layer of the cargo? It could have been possibly something organic, like grain or textile, that would have disappeared through time. Or it could be the topmost layer of a cargo and the rest of the cargo is buried. So we ran another instrument, which is called a sub-bottom profiler, 4 lines over the site, and I am told by the sub-bottom profiler expert, because I'll share a secret with you, it's a mixture, a hybrid of science and wizardry. Okay. So I am told that there is approximately 1.8 meters, so approximately 6 feet or just under 6 feet of archaeology buried under the seabed. If you're a doubting Thomas, like me, we went back, we looked at some of the photographs closely, and here you can realize that. Oops, wrong way. You can observe the second layer of cargo that's sticking out from the sediment. So we established that this was the topmost layer of the cargo. So that was phase one, 3 seasons, 2007 to 2009. What did we learn? We had a well-preserved ancient shipwreck, that it was an important one, but with the assets that we had at that time, we couldn't take it any further. We couldn't do any recovery, we couldn't do any higher resolution recording. So, in the meantime, we went back to the drawing board to start identifying the ceramic pieces, to get a date. I started collaborating with a French colleague, Jean-Christophe Sorisseau, who's an expert on the archaic, on the Greek archaic period. He excavates in Sicily. He's an expert on ancient Petecuse as well. Together we wrote a grant application. We identified the site, tentatively identified it as a Phoenician shipwreck, and got a grant to bring this ship down to Malta. And in 2014, this ship has a manned submersible and an ROV, and it's run by Comex, which is one of the most famous companies to run underwater research and underwater expeditions anywhere in the world. They also have the world record for divers, for putting humans down to depth, something like 645 meters. Okay, so this is an image of the submarine. I put it here because these are the important assets that we could deploy. 3 very high resolution cameras working in tandem. So there's besides the submarine pilot, there is a computer engineer on board who's firing these cameras, and most importantly, these bespoke lights. Why do I say most importantly? When we work underwater, I prefer to work with a mediocre camera and brilliant lights rather than have the latest DSLR and have rubbish lights. You get better results with a GoPro and very good lights. And with the submarine, we're able to produce another model, this time not just a mosaic, but also in 3D. You can see the path of the submarine where it was going around taking photos, because the farthest outlier is 6 meters away from the site. I just want you to keep your eyes in this area there, just so that you get an idea of the resolution we achieved in 2014. You can actually count the individual fish and the individual seashells. Okay, this is all online. If you, I can write on this.
Yeah.
Okay. If you Google, not now please, Grow Plan Project, all these data sets are online. You can open it up, measure, etc., etc. Okay. One of the things that we value a lot in this project is its communication. We also recovered some objects. We recovered 3 ceramic pieces, the outliers basically, or some of the outliers, and we recovered one of the blocks. They were raised with a specially built sort of claw deployed by the robot, and then we had divers go down to about 30 meters and put the objects in these bags to take the pressure of the ceramics. I would like to say that they're special bags designed by NASA, but they're bought from Lidl, which is a German supermarket chain, but good products. One of the things that we obviously, when objects come out, we have to desalinate them. We do that in our lab, and once they're desalinated, we laser scan them and also do photogrammetry. And we do this for a number of reasons. We've created a digital record. If there's somebody here who's interested in studying an archaic amphora, you don't have to travel all the way to Malta. You can study it in 3D over the web. We would give you access. And importantly, we're working with computer engineers, so we can see that we've got a partial amphora which is sticking out of the sediment. Now that we have the 3D model, we can actually project that into the sediment. This is extremely important for planning excavation. Okay, so phase 2 was a grand total of 6 days at sea with that boat. And what did we learn? That fancy boats and subs are extremely cool. You can do marine. There was a lot more to be done because of the resolution. Now we were actually recognizing new shapes that we weren't able to see before. But fancy boats are very expensive. They are beyond the budget of a sort of traditional archaeological project. So, if we wanted to take this forward, we had to come up with when I was in the submarine, I was already thinking how we could take this forward. So a low project at depth. We did not record the site after disturbing it because the weather blew up and the vessel had to seek shelter. And therefore, you know, sort of it had disturbed me that we moved objects from the site and hadn't recorded it. We needed to recover more objects because we were identifying different typologies, and obviously the idea is to recover and record. So we decided not to go into the field in 2015, but that we would prepare. We would prepare by training for the site, we would prepare by putting together a team. And by 2016, we had put together a team. The site is situated at a depth of 110 meters, which makes it about 350 feet, okay? So this is the very first dive that we conducted on the site, okay? It took me about 3 minutes to sort of come to my senses. You know, imagine I had been working on it for 9 years already, or thereabouts, and now I was there actually on the site. And we had put in requests for a number of small grants, but nobody believed that we could do this. And I was lucky that my rector, what you call a provost, okay, I think, sort of really saw the potential in this. He gave us some money on the condition that we also produced a short documentary highlighting the university's research, and sort of that enabled us to move ahead with this season. That's us. It's near pitch darkness at that depth. This is a typical dive profile. Okay, so essentially I use this slide so that you start to understand the environment that we're working in. So at 6 meters we meet to do a body check. Okay, so I make sure that my partner's okay, and then my partner makes sure that I'm okay, and then we descend. It takes anything between 6 and 8 minutes to descend. It depends if you've been asked to carry something down to the site, some tools. If you have, you probably go down faster. We have between 12 and 14 minutes on the site, okay? So if you add the 6 minutes to the 12, that's 18. We never go beyond 20. So at 20 minutes, we start our ascent, and it takes us between 2 to 3 hours to come back to the surface. The bulk of that time is spent at 6 meters on a trapeze. And many of the crazy ideas and crazy things that you're going to see here happened to me over there. Okay, so this is a model produced at the end of the 2016 survey, and this is produced clearly without a submarine, just by our team, by divers. We practiced between 2015 and 2016 in shallower water. We measured an area 14 meters by 8, which contains the site. The site measures approximately 11 by 5, 12 by 5 at a stretch. And the team sort of would count their fin strokes to know when to turn around and continue on their lines. So the model is absolutely fabulous. I mean, yes, it's a fly-through which helps with the presentation, but under this, there's sort of the substance which allows us to measure the site, etc. But we wanted to confront this, we wanted to compare this to the model made by the very expensive and cool workboat. So our computer engineers superimposed the models, and there's a maximum error in a few parts of 4 millimeters, and I'll take that, okay? Okay, so post 2016, we could dive and work, we could do it to scientific standards, just a maximum variance of 4 millimeters. We obviously needed more funding, and we were in it for the long term. And this is especially important for the students. Don't stop at the first door that's closed in your face, okay? If it is a project that you really believe in, if it is a site of importance, do not stop, even if you do a small part of what you intended to do. Because, as you're going to be seeing here, now that we insisted and we managed to go out in 2016, the fact that we could now reapply for grants and say, you know what, we were able to do it, and if you invest in us, we can do even more. Okay, so, oops. The fact that we're in it for the long term meant that we would have to put down a mooring block, okay, so that we could go down straight to the site. The problem in the first year that we worked is that if you put down a shot line every time, you sort of have to go from the end of the shot line to find the site. And if you only have 12 minutes swimming around at 340 feet for 2 minutes to find the site is not something that's very desirable. This is us, a bunch of fat middle-aged men, but that's the demography of the diving community. Unfortunately, scuba is losing its young audience, okay? But then it's not just scuba, it's a very, very specialized type of diver that can do this work. We use rebreathers, okay, so these are breathing devices that enable us to stay down without using too much gas, because helium, the gas that we use on this project, is extremely expensive, and these are our safety bottles, so just in case something happens to our primary breathing device, we can bail out, we can leave the rebreather and finish our dive in open circuit. Every day, these cylinders have to be loaded onto a van, taken to the quay at Schlendi, put on the boat, and then reverse at the end. This is Amy Wallen, a great friend and colleague. She's to date still the only woman to have dived this site. That's the boat that we work from, so not a very fancy boat at all. And in 2017, what we did is our main objective was precise recovery of a number of objects that we had identified thanks to the project phases beforehand. We recovered the objects. We have a small basket that comes down the main shot line. You can see how close the mooring block is. So once we come down this shot line, we're at the site. Okay, and oops. that the Donald Duck voice comes from the helium. So one thing, it's actually quite extraordinary that on some days we do still have a bit of light that penetrates all the way down to these depths, but quite clearly it's artificial light that provides the main lighting for our work. We're hand fanning, so we're dislodging the sediments by just gently hand fanning the sediments to one side, and what happens is that the cloud of sediment sort of hangs around us. This is the safety diver. This is video from the safety diver who's overseeing our work. That's Darth Vader who has made an appearance on the side. So this is what the recording looks like. Okay, so one diver with a camera and very good underwater lights, and a wingman who's sort of filling in the shadows. Okay, and at the end of every day, the first dive of the next day would be dedicated to gathering data to create a 3D model. Okay, so between 2016 and 2017, when we first started diving the site, we accomplished most, if not all, that there was to accomplish on the surface. We had gathered samples of most of the ceramics, we had gathered samples of the grinding stones, but if we wanted to learn more, we needed to excavate. Okay, it's a bit like field walking, but on a much more restricted scale, coming up with an exciting hotspot. Now you either decide to excavate or leave it in situ. But, and this was a massive question mark, these are the two Bibles for underwater archaeologists. Okay, so there's one produced by the Nautical Archaeological Society and one produced by UNESCO. Because of the extreme depth, we just could not turn to page 70 of the manual and say, okay, we're going to use this technique and use that equipment. So it really took a lot of thought and a lot of investment in adapting existing technologies to what we believed could work, okay, with obviously no guarantee. We definitely could not use traditional techniques that are used in sort of whatever, a project in this case, this is in 15 meters of water. So this is something that I had come up with in actually January 2018. So this is the site, this is the area I thought we could excavate, mooring block. We needed to put down mapping points, permanent mapping points, and a pump, a submersible pump to help with the dredge. A dredge is like a giant underwater vacuum cleaner. So this is how we started to formalize that plan. The white block being the mapping blocks, okay? So we could take and establish measurements for surveying the site, and we thought that we would excavate this area here to understand how the ceramics are sort of stowed against the grinding stones, and also, as you can see, we're at an extremity of the site, which means that the ship would be coming upwards. So if we excavate enough, we would uncover timbers. This is in the yard of our small department, so a lot of logistical work. So there's a big build-up, a lot of equipment that goes up. All the stuff on the right is the equipment that we take up every year to Gozo. We are lucky that we've got a work boat which gives us 2 days, and we dedicate those 2 days to a lot of heavy work. And this saves us about 3 to 4 days diving. So lowering heavy stuff like hose pipes and the dredges, etc. So we start working in late August. And this is this is what the site looked like at the beginning of 2018. It's our base map. The previous 3D photogrammetric models allowed us to measure X and Y. But if you're starting to excavate, you also need to measure Z or Z, okay? That. And the thing that permits us to do that is this instrument here. It's a 2x2 scale. It's got a spirit level and 3 adjustable legs, which we put on ceramic tiles so that they wouldn't sink into the sediment. Once you have this model with the spirit level, then you're good to start measuring downwards as well. I'll come to that. And this is the grid which is laid in place. It measures 4 by 2 meters, and then it's subdivided into 1 square meter quadrants. All of the information, starting from the discovery in 2007, is fed into a database. So the mapping points have been measured in. So that's our grid. Okay, so this is the submersible pump. We're preparing it before lowering it down. These are the dredges which help us suck up the sediments. And that is the pump, the hydraulic pump on the surface that works all of that. Typical day, okay, this is actually a small day of divers. Probably some of the team had it off, had a day off, okay, where you've got the first 2 divers preparing 3D and preparing the dredges, and then others excavating on the floater. That means I sort of hang around and do nothing and boss people about on the sea. So this is what it looks like when we're excavating. We have a large, powerful light on a tripod. So each diver is assigned a quadrant. Each quadrant has a bag. Okay, so we know that what diver was excavating where and what was brought up from that dive. Despite the use of the underwater vacuum cleaners, we still have all this suspended sediment. So you really could end up working in 0 visibility. This is a photo just as we're about to start excavating, so the visibility is great. This is actually from the 2019 season. You can see the quadrants here. The high-pitched noise you hear is the hydraulic pump working, the submersible pump. Okay, so these are the vacuums. You can see us hand fanning to disturb the sediments. And one thing is of the essence, is that it's always safety first. You can't just go down and because you have 14 minutes sort of work frantically. So you could see that diver, John, was checking his gauge to make sure that all the parameters were in order. In 2018, we put all the spoil into 2 bags and raised the bags at the end of the project. In 2019, what we did is we put filters on the edge, on the intake of the vacuum of the dredges, because it was a massive hassle to raise these heavy bags. We now have it down to 1 diver. You can see we've adjusted with more lights. Okay, so we now have 1 safety diver and 1 3D operator, whereas before it was a team of 4, then 3, now 2. Every day we would survey just the 4x2. So we would survey the entire site on day 1. After every day of excavation, we would survey just the 4x2 grid, the trench, and then at the end of the entire project, we'd survey the site again. We've developed a system, so if we're not using plumb bobs and measuring tapes to measure X, Y, and Z, what are we using? We've developed a system using a software called Cloud Compare, and I can ask my 3D operators, listen, I want to compare today to yesterday. I want to compare yesterday to the last day of 2018. And they create these heat maps. The colors coincide to changes in depth. And I want you to keep your eyes here, okay? So this is a comparison, sort of a playthrough of the changing depth of the excavation. Okay, so was it worth all this hassle to excavate? What are we seeing that we could not see on the surface? Was it worth it? Hell yes, it was. Okay, so this is a Phoenician bowl. These were widespread in the Mediterranean from the east all the way to Spain. So we've excavated that. This year, 2019, we hardly recovered anything. Most of the recovery for this area is planned for next year. We also discovered this. Must be one of the earliest graffitos on an amphora. So look, I'm the only archaeologist that dives on this site. The others are all professional divers, they're volunteers, but they are extremely, extremely keen. In fact, even more keen than some archaeologists I know. Please delete that from this. So we obviously have a WhatsApp group where we plan for the next day. We send a briefing, and then we meet every evening to go through the footage of the day and plan our strategy for the next day. And so we put it out to the team. What do you think it is? So we had dog, we had pig, we had boat. I don't know how somebody saw a boat in this, but you know, we also had facade of a building. And you see the two sort of monoliths and then something across. Finally, a chap called Dave, put up his hand, David, and he said, you know what, Tim? It's all well and good thinking theory that, you know, it could be animals, it could be a dedication. He said, but what happens if the potter had a naughty son? And when the pots were all wet with clay in his workshop, the kid drew something. How can you? So that's still on the table as well. Whether we'll ever be able to prove it is another thing. Okay, so this is the kind of survey that we do at the very end. You can see where we're slowly but surely making inroads into our 4x2. After this is done, what we do is we cover the trench with geotextile to protect the rest of to protect the site in the winter period. Okay, so that's the end of part 1, but I promised part 2 and 3 are not as long as part 1. Okay, so what are the results? For such a small site, if you say 11 by 4, that's 44 by, on average, 1 meter, that's 44 cubic meters of archaeology. It's substantial, but it's not an archaeological project on the scale, you know, on a landscape scale. But yet, the collaboration, the collaborative efforts that we have, and the results that we have, I think, sort of are disproportionately large when compared to the size of the site. So we involve our students a lot. Here we have our MA maritime students who are sieving the bags from 2018. What we did is, obviously we collected, you know, small fragments of wood that went through the vacuum. But we also kept the sand so that when we filled sandbags to keep the geotextile down, we would use sand from the site and not introduce any sort of alien sediment. We're researching the size of the ship. So we believe it was approximately 50 feet in length. Okay, there are 120 objects visible. So in total, with the grinding stones and all, we believe that she was carrying about 30 to 35 tons of cargo. There's a lot of computer engineering that goes on. So besides the this is Kari, besides the day-to-day modeling of the site, which he does after coming out of a three-hour dive, he sits down on his computer and grinds away at the data. These guys here, especially led by Piedra from France, have created a fantastic online database which you can access here. This is Cloud Compare, so essentially what we're doing is we're turning the our photographs, our model into bathymetry, into depth. Okay, so this is similar to that sort of animation I showed you, but in close-up. Again, red signifies deeper depths. This is something again that we've developed specifically for this project due to the limited amount of time we have. We all recognize this type of illustration. It's a hand-drawn sketch. We gave a photograph of our photo mosaic to a professional archaeological illustrator, and she came up with this. These are still essential to the archaeologist. You don't have the distraction of the color. You can really focus on and gain ideas into things like site formation, layout, etc. So knowing that these are essential and knowing that we can't do this on the fly, sort of sketching on the site, we're trying to teach a computer how to do it. So we're telling the computer, this is what we have, and we give it the model, and this is what we want, and we give it this. And so far, we've come out with this, which is not a replica of the archaeological sketch, but again, I'll take it, it's close enough for me to be able to see the site without any disturbance. In fact, we've gone ahead so much that we're able to produce this at the end of every working day. The archaeology, quickly, because I don't want to run over time. So, some of the objects. Petikuse, okay, so modern day Ischia seems to be common throughout, okay. Petikuse was an entrepot where Phoenicians, Greeks, Etruscans lived side by side for the sake of profit, okay. These types of Western Phoenician amphorae were made in Tunisia, Malta, and Sicily. These are Tyrrhenian types. We know them from Sardinia, we know them from Petikuse, but you can start to see sort of this central Mediterranean trade network. Porto Ercole in Etruria, Petikuse is common, Malta, Mozia, which is a small island of the Western Mediterranean, Rome, okay, which in this period had only just been founded, and again, Petikuse and Mozia, and also Malta. So, what we're beginning to see is, you know, there's something that's happening in the central Mediterranean, possibly brought about by the influx of Greeks and Phoenicians into the area, bringing with them new technologies of how to grow and make wine, how to grow grapes and make wine, new tastes. Perhaps the locals were drinking something different before, and now they wanted wine, and we're seeing this reflected, okay, this connectivity between centers of production and centers of consumption. Now, everything comes together with the goods from one tomb coincidentally on Malta. So you can see the Western Phoenician amphora, the Tyrrhenian. Okay, this is probably Uvoyan. We have one as well. This jug is that one here minus the lip. This is an unknown typology, 99.9% made locally. So either in Malta or on Gozo. This is quite large actually. Now, why is this crucial? It's crucial because of this calyx, because of this drinking cup here, which we've dated quite securely to the first 25 years of the 7th century BC. Okay, so we dated, our wreck is from 700 to 675 BC. We carry out lipid analysis. Okay, the idea is that the ceramics absorb fats from its contents, so either wine or olive oil will be absorbed, and we're working with colleagues from the University of Tübingen in Germany, and so to date we have traces of pine tar and beeswax, which could be related to a number of things on the site, including waterproofing for the planks. But we also have results for traces of wine. With a colleague from the University of Oxford, she's writing her PhD on this subject. We want to find out whether ancient DNA does or does not survive. There's a very big debate going on, and anyway, so we've given her some samples and helping her with her DNA testing. Pollen studies is a very big part. We're very excited about this. So pollen can shed light on content. Pollen can shed light on where the ship was, because for objects to be transported, they need to be buffered by twigs and branches which carry pollen. They can tell us where the objects were raised. This is a piece of bitumen which we excavated this year, and we're exploring where it came from, because bitumen in its natural form originates from the Eastern Mediterranean. We want to know which corner of the Eastern Mediterranean it comes from. This is one of the grinding stones. It's a saddle quern, so they were used for making flour, okay? And we tested the geology working with colleagues from the University of Urbino, and we know exactly which corner of the island of Pantelleria they were cut. And one of the most exciting things that sort of I used to dream about was using this shipwreck, or the goods from this shipwreck, as a yardstick. So somebody's excavating in a corner of the Mediterranean, they may have a box of, that's labeled unknown, and now they can sort of access our information and say, you know what, that's similar to the Peepers in this. And we had our first case with this. There was an archaeologist excavating in Cadiz, which is in the Atlantic Spain, and she found half a fragment of this type of grinding stone. We tested it for her, and it's from exactly the same corner, from the archaic levels. Thin sections, this tells us where the ceramic objects are from. Okay, so clay in Malta is different to clay in Sicily, which is different to clay in Tunisia, and we're getting some fantastic surprises and working on a paper as we speak. Finally, how do you communicate? Okay, we have all this fantastic stuff, all this great technologies being used, being developed, this fantastic archaeology coming out of this site, but how do you communicate it? If sort of we keep it amongst ourselves, and publish in a scientific journal, if you're lucky, 300 people will read your article, and and then maybe 20 will reference it. We're all happy, sort of in a cocoon. I'm a big believer in sharing archaeology with the public, and so we set up a small exhibition with Heritage Malta, which is the national agency for the management of our cultural heritage. It's open for free, about 3,000 people a month visit. Every year we organize an open day or an open night in the fishing village from where we set off. One of the things that I did not want to happen was sort of, here come these aliens from university, sort of loading all this equipment on, going out to sea somewhere fuzzy, and then coming back and disappearing to their base. So once a year we organize this outreach program. It was talks until last year, until 2019. We have a VR set. Here we have people who are allowed to handle objects, and here we have somebody explaining how the 3D models are created, and it was a massive success. We're working on VR, but not VR just for the sake of virtual reality. One of the things that we're developing is an educational lesson for kids that are aged 10 to 11, okay? But not only about archaeology or history. Essentially, we're using the site to teach them geography. If you say something is from Sicily, then they need to understand where Sicily is. Science, how do you understand that the objects were carrying wine. Technology, shipbuilding technology, sailing, landscape, etc. And all this will be done in a 14-minute lesson, because we want to give them, they can explore the site, okay? They have 14 minutes, so no, I wouldn't give them more than I had on the site, that's good. And then a few more, you know, then the rest of the lesson would be driven by the kids, and they will be asking their teachers, you know, what they didn't quite understand, or possibly explaining to the teachers what the teachers didn't understand about the site. And finally, I promise that this is the last slide, or two. We had a 3D model professionally done in the UK. Okay, this is 1:11, so it's 1 meter long. Some of our laser scans, so that object is actually that. So it's 11 times smaller than the original. So we had it done for a static display to put it into the exhibition where indeed it is today. But, and I did tell you that when I'm at 6 meters, I constantly think of things to do. Before we put it in the static display, we organized a big event for the visually impaired. Okay, so I went for a bit of training as to how to deliver a talk. I had this idea of delivering a talk with a soundscape rather than videos, but I was instructed to describe the videos more vividly. So essentially, you kind of treat the event like a normal talk and then use your power of description. So what we did was we, after the talk, you know, they were hearing amphora this and amphora that. We had students line up. So first they were able to handle the actual real amphora. We took it with us to the Maritime Museum. Then we told them, right, okay, so now you're going to handle an amphora that's 11 times smaller than the one you were just handling. And after that, the third stage was they were permitted to explore the site. Not one to be satisfied, I asked the Maritime Museum to go and grab, this is not obviously an amphora from the site, it's a Roman one, but nonetheless, you know, mad professor, visually impaired kid, what could go wrong? You have a very concerned Maritime Museum official looking on. But the kids had a great time, I must say. Okay, this is honestly the last slide. I'm privileged to be here talking about this as though sort of I achieved this on my own. Obviously not. I'm really proud and privileged to work with such a fantastic group of people who come together every year on a voluntary basis. I must dedicate this talk to one of our support divers, our guardian angel, who passed away in a tragic diving accident 2 weeks ago. So I really, you know, she's now really and truly our guardian angel. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Timmy, for a compelling introduction to what's obviously a fantastic project using innovative technological applications, methodologies, and coming up with some fascinating and interesting results. Am I right that your amphora are mostly coming from the Western Mediterranean?
Can't hear your question.
I'm sorry. So the amphora, are they all coming from the Western Mediterranean in this really narrow range? So we're looking at intense regional
the
trade?
vast majority are from the central Mediterranean. We have one Euboean piece, but we don't know whether it's a Greek piece made in Sicily or Magna Graecia, or whether it's actually coming from the Aegean. But that's just a one-off. All of them are from the central Mediterranean, and it's looking likely that the bulk of these are from Tunisia and Malta. And what the Phoenicians are doing on Malta is that they're copying the Tyrrhenian shape.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I'd like to take the first question from the students.
As many, whoever, as many as you like. Yes,
Thanks
sir.
for, yeah.
So what's the ultimate goal for this excavation, at least the ongoing one? Are y'all planning at some point on getting the whole 6 feet, or are you just going to do this one slice and use that to represent the rest?
Okay, so one of the reasons why we chose this area is that it's not an area where there's 6 feet. The 6 feet is closer towards the center. This is an area that's going up, because to go down 6 feet, you have to open very wide, and we don't have the time, the budget to do that. So the goal is to excavate the entire 4x2. Probably next year we will go down to, we will remove all the objects, we will go down to the ballast level and record that, and then in 2021 we will remove the ballast and hopefully record the timbers, because we're already finding small fragments of timber, so there's a very good chance that the rest of the hull is over there. So that is what we have funding for. Okay. The other reason why we chose one part of the shipwreck to excavate is that this part over here, so we're excavating here. This area here is the best preserved part of the shipwreck. So if after these 3 years of funding, we get no more funding, future generations will have the best part of the shipwreck, waiting for them. Not if I have it my way. Yes, ma'am.
I assume I don't know from the age of this if it would be possible to find human remains, and I don't know how long they last in something that that's this old.
Okay. So it depends on how quickly those human remains got buried, if they went down with the ship. To date, we've only found one fragment of possible osseous remains. We haven't determined yet from what, is it from the food that they had on board? Is it a secondary deposit, somebody passing with a yacht and throwing a chicken bone, and which eventually gets mixed up. But, so there are very, very few ancient shipwrecks anywhere in the world in which they've found human remains. So my hopes aren't. Yes, sir. You had a.
So you're 14 minutes a dive.
Yes.
How many dives a day?
It depends. We can't dive more than 3 days in a row because of the build-up of gases. So we need 48 hours to and it sounds terrible, but to off gas. It doesn't involve horrible noises and bad smells, but it's basically the gas getting out of our fatty tissues. How many dives? So each dive you've got 2 people working, so that's 28 minutes. And if you've got 3 teams, that's, what's that? An hour and a half.
An hour and a half.
At a stretch of excavation, and then the 4th dive will be 3D recording. It's closer to an hour of excavation a day.
And you can only do it 3 days in a row.
Yeah, but what we do is we stagger. So there'll be, there's always a team, at least a team or 2. If there's one team available, then there's always something to arrange. Either somebody's bumped the grid, or the light's not working, or something needs recovering. So we'll send that team down for that specific job. Yes.
This is a fascinating project.
Thank you.
Thank you for telling us about it. You dated the ship by the latest datable object on it, which is the Kylix, from the early 7th century.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about I don't know Phoenician pottery, and I'm wondering whether, I assume they're all pretty much of the same date. Are these amphoras datable in the way Greco-Roman ones are?
Yes, absolutely.
So that you can
and
go
they,
back
they
and...
all fall within the horizon. They all fall between 700 and 650.
Okay.
But it's that helix that brought it to 675. We also had a fragment of wood carbon dated, and it fits perfectly with the archaeology. Yes, sir.
So if you're the only archaeologist on staff, and you're doing multiple dives a day, but you can obviously only be there for one, how does that affect it for what you have to be there as the archaeologist to see?
Okay, that's a very, very good question. So at the end of every day, we deploy a small robot. Okay, first of all, I've got to trust my team. And we've got two manuals. One is a diving and safety manual, and the other one is the archaeological manual. So they're sent. It's updated every year, so they need to read it and update themselves. We give a project briefing to the team, and if somebody comes halfway through the project, then they're given a one-to-one briefing by the project director and by the dive safety officer. So we explain, to be gentle. If there's something that looks flimsy, then wait and work elsewhere and fill this in your log. Anyway, so at the end of the working day, we deploy a robot. We film for 10 to 15 minutes because the sediment would have settled, and on the basis of that, I can plan my strategy for the next day. We also, each team carries a point of view camera. It's called a paralens. It looks like a flashlight, but it's actually a camera that's mounted on the mast. So I can, so let's say you're diving on the site, I can see how you're working. Okay, so I can tell you, listen, Bob, sort of just hand fans a bit gentler, or work around that amphora in your quadrant. Okay, obviously it's not an ideal world. My colleagues who at the moment are excavating in a cave, he can spend 7 hours there bossing his students about and and doing, but it's the only way to work. Yeah.
Have you thought about opening it up to students, or does the dev
No, absolutely. The only place we accept our students is on the boat. Okay, surface support, so they do our security check, our safety checks, etc. And if they are highly qualified scuba divers, they offer us support at 20 meters. For the simple reason is that the divers offering us the support divers, our guardian angels, come down to 20 meters, they'll collect, for example, the camera and the lights. If somebody loses their buoyancy, loses control of the how much they can float, there's 350 feet of water below them, and obviously I won't even put that responsibility on students. There must be more students, more questions from the students. Come on. Yes.
What, if anything, are you hoping that you might be able to find when you get deeper down?
I would love to find an ostrich egg, because they were circulating at the time, and ivory. Because I believe that this ship was it started its journey in the south, and then picked up stuff from Pantelleria and Malta, and was going towards Mozia and Petecuse, and then Sardinia. It was doing this kind of cyclical pattern. So those are the two things that I have my hopes of. But the bowl was already a massive surprise for us last year. Yes?
Well, I'm surprised there's so many grinding stones from this one site. What is it about the stone at this site that makes it so important for grinding stones? You wouldn't think you would ship something like grinding stone around the Mediterranean that far.
You see, this is Because on the one hand, I'm saying I'd like to find an ostrich egg and ivory, which is sort of the luxury end of Phoenician trade, for which they're known, and the textual evidence tells us that they're these sort of rogues that trade in trinkets, etc. But the reality is something completely different. They're dealing in domestic appliances. But if you have a grinding stone that's made out of basaltic rock rather than limestone, you're going to be more efficient. It's going to be easier, and if there are ships sailing, so why not? If they could make a profit from lava stone, then they were obviously doing so. Yes, ma'am.
How do you secure the site from nosy people, from pirates?
Okay. It's a very small site and it's very deep, so it's difficult to find, and it's a very, very challenging dive, and you'd have to be super keen to steal something to risk going down that depth and not knowing exactly where the site was. And plus, the fishermen from the fishing village, because we have this rapport and we do this outreach with them, they automatically call the authorities and say, listen, there's something sort of not quite right with a boat that's lingering in that area there. So,
Just a comment to follow up on Melissa. The corns, the grinding stones, are both cargo and ballast. Ship needs ballast, and it's nice to be able. It seems to me it's nice to be able to use them in two different ways. No.
So we thought they were paying ballast, but in actual fact, they're on the top. So what we did is, because it does make sense that you would have them in the bottom as paying ballast, but they are on the upper level. We weighed one grinding stone, and it weighs 30 kilos. They all weigh nearly the same weight. And one of the large, not the very big one, not the pithos, one of the large amphoras, if it holds 30 liters of olive oil, that's 30 kilos. So it's no different to loading amphoras that are full, in actual fact. I still believe she was overloaded and sitting too low in the water. Yes?
Why is an ostrich egg considered a luxury item? Is it because of it's so big compared to what they normally see, and so they think it's so unique?
Even up until recently, sort of this further something travels from its source, the more exotic it becomes, and the more worth is added. So there is an English, well, actually she's American, but she's based at Bristol University, Tamar Hadas, and she is the expert on ostrich eggs. Exactly why they were in such demand, I don't know. I just know that they were, and probably it is because of this distance from source. Yes, ma'am.
Where do the ostrich eggs and ivory come from?
Sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay, and they came through Carthage?
Through Carthage.
Okay.
It's a bit of a two-parter, but the first one being, do we know what the crew size of a ship like this would be? And along with that, did the Phoenicians keep track of the shipping? Would there theoretically be a writing somewhere that might note the ship missing in particular?
Okay, so the crew would be between 3 and 4. This is something that the more we excavate, the closer we'll get to finding that out. For example, we've already come across a pot that was almost certainly used for either cooking and or ritual. How do we know this? There's only one, and there are traces of soot on the bottom. So this is not something brand new. With regard to what was the second part of it?
Would there be a record kept
No
somewhere of ships that were lost?
no written record. Yes, sir.
We know that soft stone, when you grind grain on it, causes you to lose your teeth over time. Did you say these were hard stones?
basalt. This is very hard basaltic rock.
So the value may have been that maybe they understood how to keep your teeth by grinding the.
You know, you'd wear them down less because this is harder stone. Absolutely. The other thing I forgot to point out is that they are complete sets of querns. Sorry about this. You can actually see the saddle quern, the base, and the rubbing stone, which would be the mobile part of the tool. So they were complete sets of brand, and we know that they're unused because they're not worn out. Yes, sir.
Are there other Phoenician shipwrecks that like you can use like compare this to?
That's a very good question. There are 7 in the world.
There's 7? Okay.
2 in the Eastern Mediterranean that are 50 years older than ours. They were discovered by Bob Ballard off Ashkelon. More or less the same size, but they were carrying, this sounds a bit contradictory to what I said in the beginning. In this particular case, they were carrying one type of amphora, this small Canaanite amphorae. There are 3 in Spain and 1 in France, but none as well preserved as this when it comes to a mixed cargo.
There are no further questions. I think that's a good note to call a halt to our formal discussion. We want to again invite you all to join us for this will work. To join us for dinner at Penny Mormon where you'll have more chance to discuss with the speaker. And